Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and this is an interview format true crime podcast where we explore the themes found at the heart of most true crime stories. So happy you're here. So happy to share another great interview with you. Today's guest is Laurie Gilbertson. She is a former Queens County prosecutor. Queens happens to be the borough I am sitting in as we speak. The courthouse where she practiced just hop and a skip away. I actually walk my dog Sherlock there almost every day. There's a couple things I wanted to talk to Laurie about. The last case she tried in New York City in 2001, which was an attempted murder case, the defendant was named Christopher Prince, and this case went to trial 3 times, which is unusual. We've heard of it, but it's an outlier. So she tells us all about that case. And I also wanted to talk to her about her current position as a board member of a legal incubator group called Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice in Denver, Colorado. They are practicing law in an entirely new and transparent way that I found really exciting. And through the course of the conversation, I also learned there are about 80 of these programs across the United States. And this is really valuable information for us, for me, for you, for anyone who might need to engage the services of a lawyer, not just criminally, but civilly. So Laurie shares about her work and the resources, so please check the show notes for some of those resources and links to where you might find an organization doing legal work like Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice in your state. There's also going to be links to ways you can follow Laurie and learn more about her work in the show notes as well. And lastly, she mentioned over the course of the interview that she spent some time in white collar. So I couldn't not ask her about Elizabeth Holmes. So we end with a good chat on Ms. Holmes' case, conviction, and while she is too smart a lawyer to take a guess on her sentencing, I make a very bold prediction. So come for the great meta conversations about law and justice and stay for a juicy Elizabeth Holmes chat. I loved this conversation because every now and then I think I should probably go to law school. It's like this itch I need to scratch. Then I have a great interview with a lawyer and I'm like, nope, I just need to keep interviewing great attorneys. So Laurie, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you for killing the small talk. And with that, here's Laurie Gilbertson. Okay, Laurie, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I am thrilled to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Rebecca.
Anytime. I always love to speak with a fellow New Yorker. I would love to talk about your time in New York because you were a prosecutor in the borough of Queens, which is precisely where I sit right now. Can you talk about that? Becoming a lawyer, how did you decide that's the side of the law you wanted to practice and move into?
Sure. Well, I grew up with a father who's a lawyer. So there were lots of conversations around the kitchen table, lots of adversarial and argumentative conversations that ultimately led me to really thinking, this is what I want to do. You know, doing trial law, watching him do it is really exciting. And like many trial lawyers, I had a bit of the frustrated actor in me as well. So, always wanting to be on stage, putting on plays with, other neighborhood kids when I was little. So it was almost a foregone conclusion that I'd go to law school. And when I did go, I knew I wanted to do trial law. I wasn't really sure exactly what kind, but my very first day in my criminal law class, listening to the professor talk about cases and realizing this is just the human story. This is just life. And that very first day, I said, this is what I want to do. I didn't know right then whether I wanted to be a prosecutor or defense attorney or really in what aspect. I explored a lot of that, but I knew criminal law was it for me.
I love how you described that because it's actually how I feel about true crime, which is not a mainstream way of thinking about it, but I think it's the story of humans. Fascinated by death, what people do, what motivates them. I mean, that's at the heart of every true crime story from my perspective. So to see you think about that when looking at laws is interesting to hear.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think that's why there's, podcasts like yours, which are so popular. That's why there's Law and Order and CSI and movies about things. That's why every time I'm in my car, I can go to Headline News and Forensic Files is on. And I can listen to, as I'm driving to pick up my kids somewhere, I can listen to murder and death and all the awful things people do to each other. And I don't mean to laugh and make light of it. It is just that true crime is about, the human experience. And I think that is why there is so much fascination with it in our society, and why people really just, dive into these cases and want to learn more.
Okay, so you decide criminal law is for you, and then there's the big decision of defending the people, which is such an important tenet of our system. Everybody gets the right to a trial and an attorney. And then the side of justice, as a lot of prosecutors I've talked to call their side, not to make it adversarial. Mm-hmm. How did you make that decision?
Well, I really did it through experience. So I went to law school at American University in Washington, D.C., and American has an incredible clinical program. So I joined the Criminal Justice Clinic, and they ran it when I was there in an amazing way, where you spent half the year doing defense work and half the year doing prosecution work. I loved both sides of the work so much, and worked so hard in the clinic that I missed so many classes that one of my professors told me I may not be allowed to take the final exam because I had not been in class, because I was out talking to clients and doing dockets in court and all that stuff that I was so excited about with the law. Ultimately, I got to take the final. I graduated. All was good. But, something about being a prosecutor really struck at my heart. And what it really was, I think at that point, was that there was something incredibly appealing about being able to, what I looked at as, wear the white hat every day, go into work with the calling and the mission to do justice. And as a prosecutor, what I found, that when used correctly, all of that power really gives you the ability to kind of affect outcomes in a way that I did not feel I would have the ability to do as a defense attorney. Yeah. And so that's what really led me to it.
And what division did you end up in?
Well, I was at the Queens County DA right near you. So I started in criminal court, prosecuting everything from, shoplifting to simple assaults. My very first day in criminal court, my supervisor walked me into the courtroom, handed me a file and said, "You have a trial starting after lunch. Judge is on the bench. Witnesses are in the back row. Go." And that was it. That was how we started. I worked my way through, ultimately, worked in the sex crimes unit, worked with crimes against children and crimes against the elderly, which was incredibly emotional and powerful and difficult and important. And then eventually ended up with more serious crimes, working in what was called the Career Criminals and Major Crimes Bureaus. We handled all kinds of pattern cases, robberies, burglaries, assaults that were borough-wide as well as citywide. And through that, also tried some homicide cases and did a bit of time in the Organized Crime and Rackets Bureau, learning something completely different in terms of wiretaps and investigations.
Oh my gosh, you really got to see it all.
Really did, yes.
So you end up making a bit of a pivot. I don't know if that's what you would call it, but before we get to that, I want to talk about the last case you tried, the last homicide you tried in Queens. This Christopher Prince trial I had not heard of, and it's a pretty brutal case. Happened right here in Queens, early 2000s. Remind me of when it happened and talk about your role and the strange outcome. I want to talk about why you think what happened. Maybe just give us the lay of the land on that story.
Sure. This happened in March 2001. This was a shooting on the campus of St. John's University in Queens, not far from you. And it was an attempted murder case. It was a case where there were a group of St. John's students, as well as a group of some other people at a bar called Traditions. I don't know if it's there anymore, in Queens. And there was a bit of an altercation and some words being said. And this group of St. John's students went back to campus, and the other group of people were angry, and they weren't finished with the argument, so they followed them there. And while there were some words being said, and while the St. John students were really trying to quell things and just kind of be done with it, Christopher Prince, who had come along with his friends there, just pulled out a gun and started shooting into a crowd of people. And, back in 2001, 2001 when this happened, I think so many school shootings are in the news now. We hear about so many things. It's become so prevalent, in such a tragic way. This was huge news to have something happen on the campus of a New York City university. Thank goodness it didn't lead to a murder. I think I said at the trial, at one of the trials, thank goodness Christopher Prince wasn't a better shot, because he did manage to shoot one person in the back, a very promising football player who ended up being paralyzed for life. And he managed to nearly miss two other people who both literally had bullet holes in their clothing where the bullets had gone right through. And there was a crowd of at least 20, 25 other people who ran. And they fortunately did not get hit, but there were probably about 15 to 20 shots fired at the time. Yeah, so this, I have to say, this was one of those cases where it got a lot of news. I was in meetings with the police commissioner and other things while this was going on, because I think media and cases, that's a whole other topic, maybe for a whole nother podcast.
Absolutely.
But there was a lot of that. And, this was a situation where the police did an incredible job. And within a day, they had tracked down Christopher Prince, and both the people who he knew as well as the people who he had shot were able to attend a lineup and identify him. And then the case proceeded to trial.
And then what happened? Because this was like, I was really surprised, because it sounds kind of like a one and done.
It really does. So, I learned quite a bit from this trial, and it, for those people listening, it was a while ago. I would imagine most people are not familiar with this, but the case did go through 3 trials, 2 hung juries, and then a conviction. And, I have spent many hours thinking about those hung juries, but it came down to a few different things. One was that it was an incredibly strong case, incredibly strong. 6 or 7 witnesses, including people who knew Christopher Prince, who were testifying about what he did. So sometimes when your case is so strong, a jury wonders, there must be something else going on, because why are we here? Why didn't this guy plead? Why are they trying this case? There must be something else. And sometimes juries, we found with the first jury, they will look to poke holes in something that is really strong. It wasn't something I thought to address in the first case, because I thought of it much like you. These witnesses are amazing. This is such an incredible case. Why are they not convicting? Another thing that came up in that case, when there were 7 incredibly strong witnesses to identify the defendant, the defense brought up the issue of identification, and they were allowed to bring in the first identification expert testimony to discredit those using psychological studies. It was the very first time in New York that was allowed.
Wow.
And the judge in the case didn't even allow a hearing on whether that should be allowed. He just decided it was. And the next day I was cross-examining an expert from John Jay College. I remember being up all night preparing. And so that was huge. I think that also, although the jury mostly discredited, it did, plant some seeds of doubt in the one person who was the holdout.
Okay, so that's the first jury.
Yes.
But the state obviously still feels like we have a case here. He should be convicted. Let's do it again. And then what happened there?
Yes, 100%. So what happened in the second trial, the defendant, Christopher Prince, decided, well, I got away with one. My thought was what, he was thinking. I guess I shouldn't speculate about what he was thinking. Let me tell you what happened.
Okay, fair.
I don't get myself in trouble. Let me tell you what happened. One of the defendant's friends got up and testified in a truly false way. And I was able to prove that through phone records and other eyewitness testimony. Okay. And so that led to some perjury charges against both the defendant and his friend, who he had kind of convinced to testify for him. And so that also threw a wrinkle into things for the second trial, because that kind of all happened during the trial. And that was also the first time in New York in New York from the Queens County DA that perjury charges were brought against a defendant for actually suborning perjury, not necessarily having it.
Another first in this case. First.
And I fought all the way, to the district attorney to make that happen because there were so many threats coming out. We were concerned about, all sorts of things. And so, that was another thing. But, it led to another hung jury. Things got confusing for them. And, you don't always know what's in the mind of a jury, but that was what happened.
So at that point, what does your team think? Is it like, at this point, are you entertaining an offer, a plea agreement, or is your team still forging ahead that this should go to trial?
Yeah. At that point, it was very, very difficult for the victim in the case.
Sure.
He had moved on. He had moved to another state. He was trying to get on with his life. So the idea for him and his close friends to even testify again was incredibly just heart-wrenching for him. And had he really decided he didn't want to go forward anymore, we would have worked something out in terms of a plea. But there wasn't really ever a time that a plea that was going to be acceptable to both parties was ever kind of on the table. That wasn't really anywhere we ever really got. So we forged ahead, and that was a time when I was getting ready to leave the DA's office, and I was getting ready to maybe give the case to, one of my mentors or someone else to move ahead with. And the victim in the case said to me, you have to do it. You know me, I'm only comfortable with you. You have to do it. Wow. And so I stayed another year, and we moved in front of a different judge. The judge ended from the two hung juries, I think, recused himself, and we moved on to a different judge, and we did a month-long trial, and they came back with a conviction in probably about 2 hours. So
it almost seems like that's the outcome you were probably expecting the first time.
It was.
Yeah.
And, just as we've said that, true crime is all about human stories, jurors are human beings.
Right.
And, you've got 12 human beings, then you throw in kind of a judge, you throw in defense attorneys, you throw in witnesses, you have got a human story. And, as a prosecutor, you don't have control over it. And, there's really no one who has full control over it.
Right,
so
right.
There are outcomes that can be really surprising. Ultimately, I think we talk a lot about justice, but ultimately justice was done. The case has been upheld on appeal. And, the victim in the case, he will never walk again. But he got to see a system that ultimately worked for him. He got to come into court on the day of sentencing and address the defendant and tell him exactly what his life was like now because of it. And he got to know that there were people working tirelessly to give him whatever little bit of closure in his life he could get to move on. And ultimately that for me was what being a prosecutor was all about.
Wow, that's really a great illustration of your earlier point about just this whole system run by humans. So there's the law, but there's also interpretation and subjectivity and discretion of a judge. There's so many factors that you can't control the outcome, like you said. Can I ask what his conviction was for attempted murder?
Yes, for attempted murder.
Or his sentence.
Yeah, attempted murder, assault, possession of a weapon. He received 30 years.
Wow.
And during the time that he was actually out on bail, he was out on bail at some point, which I strenuously argued against. And he was then arrested for another gun charge where he shot at someone. And I actually tried that case before the St. John shooting, and he was convicted on that. And so ended up, kind of being in custody at the time of this case. But yes, he is serving 30 years.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So you were about to leave. You stayed to do that case. Was your next step Colorado? And where does Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice come in? I know you sit on the board of this organization, which looks like an incredible organization. Could you tell us about that next step in your career?
Sure. After the district attorney's office, I took a little foray into some other things. I worked in white collar crime for a while. I worked in legal education about 5 years ago. Ended up moving to Denver. And Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice is an organization that is the first legal incubator for attorneys who are starting their own firms and are really dedicated to access to justice issues. And I ended up, first moving to Denver, doing some networking. I didn't know anyone here, didn't know what my next move would be. And someone connected me with an amazing Supreme Court justice in Colorado. And she and I had coffee. And this was a project of hers. She'd been working on access to justice issues for many years. And she invited me to join the committee that was working on this. And I had never heard of an incubator. I didn't know what a legal incubator was. And so I learned, when someone as amazing as she is asks you to join a project they're passionate about, you just kind of say yes. So I said yes, and I've been saying yes ever since. So I joined the board. And what it really is this organization that looks at the fact that, in Colorado, there are so many people who are unrepresented when they come to court in civil cases, and that many people have trouble. There's this huge justice gap of people who can't necessarily afford market rates. The huge sums lawyers are
Sure.
charging. And then they don't fall into that group that really makes under, I think the limit's about $12,000 to be able to get legal aid or pro bono assistance. So you have this huge middle market of consumers. They could pay something. They want quality legal representation. They can't find it, and there aren't enough people offering it. So what Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice wanted to do was really teach lawyers how to start law firms that can offer reasonable, predictable, transparent rates, serve this middle market, and do so much good at the same time. So that's what we learn.
So are you finding that young law students and young lawyers in their career are really, obviously, if they're in the incubator, they're excited about it, but what's the larger community, the larger legal community's response? Because law school's expensive. Some lawyers probably feel like they have to make some money back. I'm so encouraged to hear this, but what's the perception like, and what's the response been?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the perception kind of aligns with what you're asking. The idea is, kind of on the other side of the access to justice, the idea also, and what's been put into practice, is that we want lawyers to be able to make a good living, to have a sustainable, thriving practice and live a life where they can be, happy doing the work that they want to do in the way they want to do it. So it's not, really about not making money. We want these lawyers to be able to make as much money as they want to make.
Okay.
And work as hard as they want to work serving this community. And it's a new kind of public interest law where lawyers can actually make enough money to repay their loans, all those kinds of things. In fact, we worked with some universities for loan forgiveness for being in this incubator, and they were agreeable to it because it is a kind of public interest. So in terms of the legal community, the legal community is interesting. I think that there are so many things that are quite conservative about the legal community, and it takes a while to convince lawyers to try something new. Yeah. So, when people hear the idea, some people are just jump right on, like, this is amazing. It solves so many problems. This is fantastic. And we see some law students and also people who, are embarking on second careers. Right. Who are maybe, instead of retiring, want to really keep practicing, or people who have been at law firms for, anywhere from 3 to 7, 8, 9, 10 years and say, I really want to do this differently. And lawyers who are open-minded and kind of have that business mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset. So it's a mix. It's a mix of people who join. And like you said, they're gung-ho. They're in it. They're gung-ho about it. And we did have support from both law schools in Colorado, which is amazing. And what is so incredible is that since I left the organization a few months ago, we've kind of gone through a transition, and the Supreme Court of Colorado has decided and is currently fully funding and running the organization. So
Wow.
it's incredible. It has support from, this incredible influential court to really change what the practice of law can look like in Colorado.
Oh, that is really, really cool to hear. And you mentioned it's for civil law cases. So like, what would an example be of a client engaging the services of legal entrepreneurs for justice?
Yeah, so it's not just civil law cases. This was this was a lot of kind of the research that had gone into it with access to justice issues, but a lot of the practice areas that it works for can be criminal defense.
Okay.
Had lawyers do that. Family law, estates and trust law is a big one. Immigration law is huge.
Sure.
So these practice areas work really well. And what we encourage lawyers to do is make everything transparent. So when someone goes to a website, say for a family lawyer who is in the LEJ, Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice, I know it's a mouthful, so LEJ community, they can see prices right up there. This is what it will cost for you to work through your divorce. This is what it will cost for me to come to a half-day hearing. This is what it will cost for me to give you some, do-it-yourself papers, and then I'll review it. So they can really have a choice of how to proceed. None of the lawyers are allowed to bill by the hour.
Aha.
So, totally different kind of billing, and just really revolutionizing the way that lawyers can practice. So let's say someone is trying to get a green card. They could go to the website of one of the Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice lawyers, which is on the website, and they could see this is what it will cost me. Here's the free consultation or in some way paid consultation I can get. This is what this lawyer can do. And really have some comfort in knowing that the clock isn't ticking the second they talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that they're getting some value, and that hopefully their case can be resolved in a way that is really beneficial to them, because there's some amazing lawyers.
Honestly, this is more revolutionary than I realized, because I haven't had to use a lawyer often in my life, but the couple of times I had, I'm terrified to pick up the phone. I'm like, hello, what do you need? Please tell me quickly. Like, I don't want to be charged for this call. And like, it's such a stress. But the transparency aspect and all those different categories of law that a person needs in their life over the course of, some more than others. But wow, that's great. I love hearing about that. I hope there's more things. Do you think this will crop up? Do you think this could become a new trend in other states?
There are about 70 to 80 or so of legal incubators all across the country who are doing this kind of amazing work.
Okay, so listeners, check your state to see if there's something like that. I know I'm going to search New York after we hang up.
There's some great ones in New York, and the American Bar Association, I think on their website, if you search for legal incubators, they've got a listing.
Beautiful. I'll put that in the show notes. You mentioned a brief stint, or I don't know how brief it was, in white collar crime. And so we talked a little offline about our girl, Elizabeth Holmes. And I wondered if you might shed some legal expertise. And you followed the case. I followed the case. I had Rebecca Jarvis on the podcast. The conviction just happened. What struck you about Elizabeth Holmes? Why do you think we were endlessly fascinated about her in particular? I wonder, would we have cared? Were she a middle-aged white man in Silicon Valley? Do you think her being a woman and so young when she started her company made it so compelling? What are your thoughts there? And then kind of throughout the trial and conviction, what do you think?
I didn't actually start thinking about the way that this plays into any ideas about women entrepreneurs or women, defendants in justice, until after I had kind of read the book and gotten all fired up about it and listened to the podcast and got all fired up and was so kind of incensed at this fraud. I mean, it's clearly fraudulent. I mean, as the jury found too, but, even just so much evidence of this just incredible hubris and fraud that affected so many people's lives. I mean, not just the lives of people who invested, the lives of the people who work there, the lives of people who wanted to be able to go, to the drugstore and get a blood test, and the immense amount of hope that she put out for people that she seemed to me she never intended in any way to fulfill. So I saw just such an incredible injustice there. And I was heartened at the jury's verdict that they did find her guilty. I think that was a just verdict. But as you bring up these issues, I think that those issues about women and the attention that this got and the attention that was paid to how she looked, what she wore, what her hair looked like, her boyfriend, right, Sonny at the time. So there's your middle-aged man.
Yeah.
No attention.
Right. Who cares? Yeah, exactly. And nobody even knows that he's like going on trial any day now. Right. And like no one's talking about it.
And no one cares. And
I know.
I did start thinking, also, are there other companies, other frauds that have been perpetrated that didn't get the same kind of book attention, media attention, trial attention as Elizabeth Holmes because the protagonist wasn't quite as enticing? And are people getting away, are middle-aged men or other people who may not be as interesting to the world getting away under the radar with a lot of things because their very persona is not calling attention to them? I wonder about that.
I suspect yes. Suspect yes. And I also wonder if this is unfortunately negatively impacting the perception of women in startup America and entrepreneurs because she has been singled out to this. I mean, she's rightfully been singled out and tried and convicted, but we're seeing this case with a woman and we see so few women there in that space already,
I've given that a bit of thought. And the fact that the fraud was so pervasive, what I believe so intentional, so supported by the evidence, this wasn't some hatchet job of people looking at her and I think wanting to take her down. The fact that she did it with such conviction really is, it was so off-putting to me when I read the book that I think my mouth was just hanging open. Like, I can't believe people are supporting this and she's doing this and she knows what she's doing. So that counters a bit to me, the idea that, all female entrepreneurs are going to be painted with this same brush. Mm-hmm. It may, I don't know what kind of effect it's going to have. I almost see her case not as a trend, but as an outlier.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. I hope I'm not going to get this right. I don't remember all the charges and what she was convicted on, but there were a few she wasn't. And one of them was, the responsibility for the patients who were named in the case. What did you make of that? That the part with the investors was very clear cut, but she was just enough removed from the patient outcomes that she couldn't be held responsible. What did you think of that?
It's an interesting one. And I can see how a jury might have trouble connecting all those dots. Like, they could easily connect it to the money, easily connect it to the investors. But was there ever, interactions that were presented that really put her in a position of responsibility to patients that the jury could kind of hang on to enough for a conviction? So when I heard that, I just kind of felt like they were comfortable dealing with the investors and the money and the evidence there. And they obviously weren't comfortable connecting her to the patients. Can't say whether that was right or wrong. I wasn't in the courtroom to know all the evidence, but it just seemed like they gave her something there. They absolved her of some responsibility there. And it was probably something that may have been more difficult to convict, because it also may be more emotional and more difficult to connect this defendant in the courtroom to kind of someone maybe in a different state who she's never met, who they may not, just see her being responsible for. But, it's interesting because in all of her marketing, it's exactly where she was going.
Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, completely. Yep. Any sentencing predictions?
Oh, gosh. I really don't know. Maybe we'll have to talk about that after it happens.
Okay,
I don't have a prediction on that one. What do you think?
Oh, well, I'm sure as a lawyer, you're just much more guarded and cautious and don't want your reputation tarnished. I've got nothing to lose. So I am saying publicly over 5, under 10. And I realize it can be a lot higher. There's some minimum sentence or something I read about 30 years or 20 years, but I do think a judge can use some discretion there. I do think she doesn't have a previous criminal record. Yeah. I think she's got amazing attorneys who are going to do everything they can to mitigate a lengthy sentence. So yeah, I'm saying over 5, under 10.
I don't know. I think, I think you may nail that completely right.
We'll see. Time will tell. I'm fine with being wrong. Well, this is a toughie, but I am opening this season with a new closing question, and it's, in your own words, can you tell us what you believe justice is?
So you're ending with the easy questions?
Exactly.
That's how this is going?
Yes. And you're literally the second person I've asked, and I'm like, wow, this really is a little harder than I thought it was going to be. So I appreciate you taking a stab at it.
No, I love it. I'd put it down to 3 things: accountability, consequences, and closure.
Ooh.
Accountability, meaning that someone is held responsible for their actions. Consequences that actually fit those actions and are aligned with them. And closure especially in criminal justice, closure in a way that makes sense to the people involved. Because, people who have suffered violent crimes, they never really get closure. Their families never really get closure.
Yeah.
Their lives can be made a little bit better by knowing that there is some justice done for them and people working for that.
Well, that was amazing. That was a great answer. You made it seem easy. Laurie, I love talking to you. Can you tell us where people can find you if they want to know more or follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me, contact me through my website, which is Tribeca Blue Consulting. It is a long name, Tribeca, which is Triangle Below Canal, for those non-New Yorkers. And right now I work doing some communications coaching, and I work with attorneys on trial coaching and training. So feel free to contact me through there and connect. I'd love to chat with anyone who's a listener of this podcast.
Perfect. I'll put it in the show notes as well. And Laurie, thank you so much for killing the small talk. This was great.
Rebecca, thank you so much for having me. This is such an awesome conversation.
Likewise. Dialogue is a Yellow Tape Media production, audio engineered by Jason Usry and produced, hosted, and edited by me, Rebecca Sebastian. If you love the podcast, please consider becoming a diehard by signing up at patreon.com/dialogue. Other ways to support the show? Follow along on social media. We are at Dialogue Pod across platforms, and you can now watch most episodes on YouTube by subscribing to my channel, Rebecca Sebastian. For more information or to drop me a note, visit RebeccaSebastian.com. Until next time, thank you for listening and killing the small talk.